Afternoon, folks. This is the Sunday Politics. George Osborne surfaces after a dreadful set of local election results for the coalition, for which the unravelling of his budget is getting much of the blame. We hear from Tory MPs with a strong message for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister.
He needs to wake up and smell the coffee. This is a major setback for the Conservative Party.
The coalition is reeling, but is Labour really on the way back? Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls joins us live. It wasn't just Labour putting pressure on the Tory vote, it's also under threat from the UK Independence Party. I'll be talking to the party leader, Nigel Farage. And our political panel of the best and the brightest here every week to analyse British politics in the week ahead and tweeting like demented pixies throughout the programme.
Coming up in half an hour, we'll be live in Bradford following a dramatic election and finding out why families like this switch their allegiance to George Galloway's Respect.
All that coming up in the next hour, but first the news with Maxine Malwini.
Andrew, thank you. Good afternoon. The Chancellor, George Osborne, has admitted the economy is not growing as fast as the government would like and that the coalition needs to focus more on the things that matter to voters. Speaking on the BBC's Andrew Marr programme this morning, Mr Osborne said the Conservatives need to take their poor showing in Thursday's local elections on the chin. Tim Reid reports.
This morning's papers will have made uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister, filled with fallout from the local elections in which both coalition parties suffered. Today the Chancellor said he understood why voters, and in particular Tory backbenchers, might be unhappy.
We take it on the chin. We've got to learn from what you're saying, and I think what people are saying to us is focus on the things that really matter, focus on the economy and on welfare and education and healthcare. Focus on those things. Don't get distracted by too many other issues.
The Chancellor dismissed suggestions by some unhappy Tories that the government is too focused on Lib Dem policies like Lord's reform and gay marriage. But the party's internal divisions are growing after the gloom of the local elections. One Tory backbencher has indicated that David Cameron could face a vote of no confidence by Christmas. Labour's making the most of the coalition's difficulties, but the party says voters are unhappy with the government's direction.
They said, we're all in this together. They said they would be a fair government, but delivered a budget that started the omnishambles, that saw a tax cut for millionaires and left millions paying more.
With the coalition due to set out its priorities this week in the Queen's speech, ministers insist the priority is the economy. Tim Reid, BBC News.
Voting's underway in the French elections with both President Sarkozy and his challenger, the socialist candidate François Hollande, urging people to cast their vote in what's likely to be an extremely close battle at the ballot box. From Paris, Katja Adler reports.
After months of debates, discussions and political rallies, today is the day France finally chooses its president. And there's no sign of election fatigue. Turnout is expected to be high. In bad economic times, people say this is a vote that matters.
To me, the most important issue is the economic crisis and the fact that people they don't have enough money to live their life.
They've heard the campaign promises, but do people believe either presidential candidate can turn the economy around?
I think a lot of people say it will be a president by default. They don't choose a president, they want to avoid another president.
Still, French voters have to make a choice between a president from the centre-left or from the centre-right, and that will have an impact.
That's why these elections are of such interest outside France too. The French economy is one of the biggest in Europe, and to date, France has been at the forefront of the fight against the crisis in the Eurozone alongside Germany. So the relationship that the new French president has with Germany will be crucial, not just to this country, but to the continent and to the international markets as well.
The two presidential candidates cast their votes this morning. Many say they'll only decide which one of them to vote for at the very last minute. The tension in France is mounting. Katya Adler, BBC News, Paris.
Well, voting is also underway in Greece in a general election which may determine whether it faces more austerity. The last opinion polls published before a 2-week blackout ahead of the election showed that minor parties were picking up support at the expense of the main socialist and conservative parties. That's it for the moment. There's more news here on BBC One at 10 to 6. Andrew.
We've survived the budget, we've survived Pastygate, we've survived jerry cans, we even survived being endorsed by David Cameron. So quipped the ever not so loyal Boris Johnson. His narrow victory in the London mayoral race was the one bright spot in an otherwise grim set of local election results for the Conservatives. Their Lib Dem coalition partners did even worse. In a moment, the sound of Tories rebelling. But first, here's Adam Fleming.
Welcome to the long, hard slog of a bumper election night at the BBC. We've got a Dimbleby, endless refreshments and a lot of numbers to crunch as the local councils in England get counting.
Let's have a look, shall we, at projected national share. Share the parties would have got had these elections taken place across the whole country. You can see Ed Miliband's party on 38%. And then the Conservatives, quite a way behind them here, 31%.
So a fairly clear picture emerging there. Big gains for Labour, not a very good night for the Tories, and a pretty bad night for the Lib Dems as well, doing almost as badly as they did last year. And one of the big reasons Labour is celebrating is a lot of those seats are in the kind of places they need to do well to win at the next general election. Oh, did I mention the refreshments? In Scotland, Labour also fought off the SNP to maintain the hold they've had on Glasgow City Council for decades. While in Edinburgh, a man dressed as a penguin beat the Lib Dems. Nigel Farage's UKIP saw their vote go up, not enough to gain any extra councillors, but enough to worry the Tories. 20 hours after the polls closed, now I'm heading to City Hall for the really big result. Mayor of London.
Feeling confident, Ken? Going to be staying in the building permanently, do you think, after tonight?
Oh, no one wants to sleep here.
Except it started to look like we might have to, because the result was delayed thanks to a power cut and some crumpled ballot papers. At least they've got great refreshments here too.
Meanwhile, we're hearing that city after city is deciding they don't want their own Ken or Boris. Of the 10 places having referendums on whether to introduce elected mayors, the vast majority have said no. Apart from Doncaster, who voted to keep theirs.
Finally, just before the clock struck 12,
I therefore declare Boris Johnson to be elected as the Mayor of London.
Boris was re-elected, although it was closer than people had expected.
Thank you very, very much, everybody, and may the 4th be with you. Thank you.
So Dimbleby's off, Labour won the locals, but the Tories got the mayor, and the Lib Dems look as limp as these sandwiches. Plenty for everyone to chew over.
Adam Fleming, he still ate the sandwiches. It's a constant of British politics that all governments take a bit of a mid-term pasting, even ones elected by a landslide, which this one most certainly wasn't. But a growing body of Tory MPs think that unless David Cameron gets his act together, and fast, it's a lot more serious than the usual mid-term blues. Here's a favour of their concerns.
He needs to wake up and smell the coffee. This is a major setback for the Conservative Party. I believe that it was created because the Prime Minister is seen to be too much motivated by a Liberal Party that has no interest in Conservative values, and I think he needs to rethink his policies.
I fear that Nick Clegg has insisted that House of Lords reform is right at the top of the Queen's speech. It's not too late to change that. I think we should make clear to the voters that our priorities at Westminster are their priorities, about getting the economy going, about getting living standards rising again. And House of Lords reform should be relegated right down to the bottom of the queue.
But if we don't actually respond to what the electorate have told us on Thursday, the fact that we didn't get more people out voting for the Conservative Party, the fact that we're actually getting messages on the doorstep, that their messages on Europe, immigration and welfare are more attractive to them than what we're actually getting across. We need to learn that lesson, and then we'll deal with the UKIP problem.
So Labour is on the rebound, but many Tory MPs are even more worried by the threat to their right flank from the UK Independence Party. His vote was up an impressive 10 percentage points on its performance at the general election, taking its share of the vote to 13%, just behind the Lib Dems. I'm joined now by UKIP leader Nigel Farage. Welcome. A year ago you fell out of a plane. It's good to see you still in one piece. Thank you. Exactly to this year. Where does UKIP go from here? What's the game plan?
What we saw on Thursday was good, solid, steady growth. An average score of 13% of the vote. And interestingly, most of those votes in the big metropolitan parts of England, where previously we haven't done very well. The plan is to fight the county elections next year, where we should be even stronger. And this week we'll get to work putting up a full slate of candidates across the whole of England. And we'll get ready to fight a European election in 2014. And remember, we came second last time in 2009. And to push on to a general election in 2015 as a party that isn't there simply as a protest for disgruntled Tories about Europe. We're a party putting out a full manifesto. You know, we want a different energy policy, one not based on building wind turbines everywhere. We want our kids to have the chance of going to selective schools. We want to help our 4.2 million small businesses by getting rid of excessive labour practices. So all of this says UKIP is a real party and it's here to stay.
Like to tell us any more about these possible defections from the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, at the moment, we've got Conservatives saying, and we've just seen some of them, Cameron needs to change course, he's too close to the Lib Dems. Look, the fact is, David Cameron himself doesn't come from a business background, has no understanding of the striving classes, is committed to green taxes to fight global warming, and believes we must stay a member of the EU, and there mustn't be a referendum. And I would say to these sceptics, frankly, guys, you're in the wrong party. The Eurosceptics have lost every single battle since Maastricht. If they came into UKIP, helped us, gave us increased credibility, perhaps we could build a real force in this country that actually wants to put the interests of Britain first.
What would happen to UKIP, though, if David Cameron, he may not do this, but if he was bold enough to put a commitment to an EU in-out referendum in the next Conservative manifesto? I mean,
why would I believe him? I mean, he's done all this before. Remember, this is the guy that wrote in the Sun newspaper when he was getting on very well with the Murdoch press, that he gave us a cast-iron guarantee that when he was Prime Minister, we'd have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. He hasn't delivered. If it goes into a manifesto, frankly, what I will think and what people will say is Cameron's a bit like Blair, just not as good at it. He'll make any promise he can just to get elected.
OK, so you hope to do better in the county elections next year. That's more your territory. Yep. And then the big enchilada for you is the European ones. People even talking you may come top of the poll. Is that an aspiration?
Of course it is, yes. I mean, we've come third, second in the last two European elections. We're the only party saying we want to have a trade relationship with Europe, we want to be friendly with Europe, but make our own laws in this country. And that resonates out there.
But, you know, if you want to join the big time, you're still seen as unprofessional, amateur, even, I would say, unacceptable. I mean, your press officer called the Tory chair, Baroness Vasi, quote, a bitch.
Well, look, Baroness Vasi was deeply insulting to us, trying to liken us to the BNP, and yes, our press officer responded. You know, it happens in the thick of it, it happens in real life. We all use language we shouldn't at times.
And he shouldn't have used that language?
He shouldn't have done it, of course not.
Because she's not?
I think what she said was totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
I think she's just about the lowest grade chairman the Tory party's ever had.
But is she?
And to compare us to the BNP was quite wrong.
Doesn't sound like much of an apology.
It was just the wrong choice of word, that's all.
And then you had this so-called internal error. In London, the UKIP name on the ballot papers, you didn't get it. I mean, that makes you a joke, doesn't it?
Well, it says that we've got to professionalise the thing. It says to me, we can't go on running the party as it is. We've got to have a proper campaign office in London with a full-time experienced campaign director so that this can never happen again.
You know, you got a decent percentage of the poll, I understand that. Yeah. But the blunt truth is, you didn't win any more seats. You did terribly in London. You're still a one-man band. The one-man band is playing his instrument in front of me now.
London was a failure. Across the rest of England and in parts of South Wales, we had a very good night on Thursday. We did gain seats in all sorts of places, from Grimsby to Tunbridge Wells. We're picking up support not just from the Tories, but from Old Labour and Lib Dems too. Yes, we've got to raise more money. Yes, we've got to get more professional. And I would urge those people in the Tory party who can't stand Cameron, come and help me do this job.
Well, they need to help you because it's only you.
Well, that's absolutely
There's
rubbish.
not another single name anybody's heard of in your party.
Well, that's not true, is it? I mean, my deputy, Paul Nuttall, is appearing on more and more programmes, both on the BBC and Sky and elsewhere, and is very accomplished and very good. The party's growing, it's doing well, and we're confident.
Nigel Farage, thanks for being with us today on this auspicious anniversary.
Thank you.
This submarine has surfaced. That was how one pundit put it to me this morning when George Osborne appeared on the BBC's Andrew Marr show. It was meant to be Nick Clegg, but with the budget getting the blame for last week's electoral pasting, Tory High Command decided it was time the Chancellor put his head above the waves. But is he waving or drowning?
The government understands your message. We take it on the chin. We've got to learn from what you're saying. And I think what people are saying to us is focus on the things that really matter, focus on the economy and on welfare and education and healthcare. Focus on those things. Don't get distracted by too many other issues. Make sure that you understand that the people in this country are having a tough time. We do understand that, and we are doing absolutely everything to take Britain out of this horrendous mess that it got itself into over the last decade and make sure we have a brighter future, not just for ourselves, but for our children.
And the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, joins us now for the Sunday interview.
So soon,
so soon, but we had
George Osborne's come out, I suppose I should too.
Exactly, and you're not so much of a submarine. We see more of you. Now, the Chancellor said on Andrew Marr this morning that the economy has been weakened by the Eurozone crisis, high oil prices, and a bigger than expected dampening effect of the deficit and all the debt. Do you deny that these are important factors in our economy?
Well, did he mention the snow or the royal wedding? Of course those are factors, but 2 years ago, George Osborne made a judgment. And I said, and some economic commentators did too, that that judgment was the wrong judgment. He said cutting further and faster would secure the recovery, get us out of the danger zone. We're now back in recession. His judgment's wrong. His plan has failed, and that is the reality of where we are.
But these are, surely, I mean, you may be right on that, but these are also important contributory factors, aren't they? Because they're affecting all of Europe. Of course. I mean, everywhere in Europe is now slowing down, even Germany.
But I warned 2 years ago, a global hurricane was brewing, particularly in the Eurozone. That was not the time for George Osborne to bet the farm, to dismantle the foundations of his own house. That's what he did, and he said he was right. And what's happened now is, as the Euro storm has built in the last few months, look, we've been in recession in the domestic economy now for pretty much a year before the Eurozone crisis. You can't blame the Eurozone for a recession made in Downing Street, and it's not about communication. George Osborne can't get out of this with more spin doctors. It was judgment. His plans failed, and it's also been proved to be unfair as well as bad for jobs and growth.
I want to come back to the economy later, but on the reform of the House of Lords, going to be a big part of the Queen's speech, we're told. The government, there are signs the government is heading in the direction of a referendum, which is what you want. If you get a referendum, will you campaign for a yes vote?
I will campaign for reform of the House of Lords, absolutely. We'll need to see what reform exactly means.
But you want an elected chamber?
I voted for 50, 60, 80% last time round. I think we need democratic reform of the House of Lords, no question about that. But Andrew, today, is it the biggest priority? Pensioners paying more tax, the economy in recession. Is that really the biggest priority?
But if
I don't think it's going to save the coalition.
Second chamber, you'll vote yes. Okay. Let's move on to the election results. They were good for your party. But let's just take a look at some of the figures to try and put it into some sort of mid-term performances. Because you got about 38% of the vote. In 86, Neil Kinnock, 37, William Hague, 38 in 2000, Michael Howard, 38 in 2004. Everyone then went on to lose the next general election. You haven't got this in the bag by any means, have you?
No, of course not. They were good results. There's no reason for complacency. It's a concern that lots of people who are very disillusioned with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats were staying at home. Turnout was down. We've got more work to do to regain trust. But don't forget, in 1999, 2 years into the Labour government, We won the local elections. Clearly, this is not just midterm blues. This is actually, and you see this in the Conservative Party reaction, you can see David Cameron and George Osborne so rattled today because this is quite deep. It's about an economic failure of judgment and this sense that these Conservative leaders are out of touch and making the wrong calls on tax and fairness in the economy.
But can we agree that your performance, though good, is not out of kilter? It's nothing exceptional. It's in line with the regular midterm performances.
Well, the Conservatives were comparing this on Thursday and Friday to 1996 for Labour or to 2007-8 for the Conservatives. Both times they had been in opposition for 10 years before those local elections. We've only been out of power for 2 years and we did badly in the general election. So actually to be back in the lead, winning the argument after 2 years is good. But does it by itself guarantee an election victory? No, it doesn't. There's more to do. But I think for the Conservatives, this is much deeper than midterm blues.
OK, I want to stick with Labour, though, because one of the things that was impressive about Labour's performance was that you are the only national party now, that the Labour brand still works across the country. Even in the south, you made some gains.
The east as well.
Why did you therefore fail to win London?
I think in the GLA elections, the actual popular vote for Labour versus Conservatives, we won.
So why did you fail to win the mayor's office?
There was a personality contest between Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson just squeaked it. I think it's partly that people were judging it on the basis of, you know, personality and joke cracking and all that kind of stuff.
Was Ken Livingstone the best candidate for Labour?
I back Ken Livingstone. I think he was the best mayor we've had so far. I think he'd be a better mayor than Boris Johnson. I think many Londoners thought that. Not quite enough. But as you said,
the best candidate? I mean, you won London. This is a Labour city we're in at the moment. You won the London Assembly. You couldn't win the mayoralty. He must have not been the best candidate.
The thing is, in the end, though, if you look at houses in London, the South Bank regeneration, Ken did these things.
So why didn't people vote for him?
Because in the end, they didn't think. I mean, it's interesting. If you'd had an elected mayor in Leeds or Birmingham, they'd have had far more power than an elected mayor in London. Many of the tax-raising powers are actually with the boroughs. Boris Johnson, I have to say, if I was Boris Johnson looking at these results, I'm not sure if I'd be quite as confident.
But he won. And can we agree on one thing? If another Johnson had been standing, he'd have walked it, called Alan Johnson.
Look, who knows?
Right?
Who knows? Who knows?
Okay.
Who knows? The important thing, which I'm not going to glide over, is we won Norwich, Thurrock, Harlow, Ipswich, Southampton, Plymouth. The South and the East. People said Labour couldn't win in the South.
No.
David Cameron can't win in the North. Labour's winning in the South. That's a big difference.
I've given you all that.
I know, but I was having it again.
No, I know that. You're like Boris Johnson. You're in favour of having your cake and eating it.
I think Boris has eaten more cake than me, though. Don't you think? He looks like he's eaten more cake than me.
Well, that's because you've been doing the marathon. Let's have a look at something.
Not a sprint.
This is what the Chancellor had to say in his article in the Mail of Sunday today. This is what he said. Bowles and Miliband, they're like a pair of heavy drinkers trying to wash away problems by opening another bottle. Will your thirst ever be quenched with more public spending?
Look, George Osborne's looking a bit rattled today, isn't he? And you learn with David Cameron and George Osborne, when they're rattled and under pressure, they always get personal, they always lash out. But the country agrees we need a plan to get the deficit down. I agree with that. We all agree with that. If George Osborne thinks that's a vote of confidence in him, he's making a big mistake, because the country also knows his plan has failed. And the public are now saying, where's the jobs? Where's the growth? This is not about communication. It's not about spin. That is very complacent from George Osborne. Well, people want a plan which will work. And they're all saying, too, as well, you've cut the top rate for millionaires and put up taxes for pensioners and families. That's not fair either.
All right. But if we want to look at an alternative, can you flesh it out a bit? Can you answer the question you wouldn't answer when you were last on this programme with me? How big would the fiscal stimulus be if you were in power? How much extra would you add to the deficit?
Well, look, I'm not going to reduce this to simplistic slogans and one-year plans. It's actually about what would happen in the economy over 3 or 4 years. George Osborne is borrowing to pay for unemployment. I say a jobs plan, a VAT cut, bring forward infrastructure would actually be better over 3 or 4 years at getting the deficit down.
How much would it add to the deficit?
Well, George Osborne's borrowing £150 billion more than he planned because he's failed on the economy. In the end, this austerity doesn't work. It's self-defeating. Even the head of the European Central Bank is now saying you need a growth plan in the Eurozone.
Well, but he's talking, he will come on to that, but he's not talking about the kind of growth plan you want. He's talking about labour market reforms. Let me ask you this again.
Are you sure?
We've come on for second time.
Right.
How much would the deficit go up in the early years? Tell us.
We'd have a VAT cut.
No, we
which
know
would cost us £12 billion.
How much?
I've not costed the whole programme because it would depend upon how much infrastructure we can bring forward. But George Osborne's plan means more spending, less taxes and more borrowing. Over 3 or 4 years, we would get the borrowing down faster than George Osborne because our plan would work. That's what America's proved. That is what Britain would do.
But it's surely at least a legitimate concern that any departure from the current policy would spook the markets, push up interest rates, undermine sterling. I mean, there is a risk. It's not risk-free, what you're saying.
Well, the current plan has failed. That's the problem
but
for George
Euro
Osborne.
It's a risk.
The current plan has failed. And George Osborne has spent 2 years, and David Cameron, saying any change of course will make things worse. If you're in a hole, you should stop digging. He should listen to the International Monetary Fund, the OECD. He should look at examples of countries around the world, a more balanced plan, boost for jobs and growth, tough decisions on spending and tax, would actually get the deficit down. He's failed on jobs. He's even failing on borrowing, Andrew. That's his problem. This is a failed plan. Well, we're back in recession.
Someone is probably going to be elected in France today. We'll see. Who's kind of singing from your song sheet. But what bits of François Hollande's economic policy do you disagree with?
Well, look, the problem François Hollande has got is that in the context of the current Eurozone policy, a European Central Bank not working, a fiscal compact which is crucifying growth and jobs, it's very hard for François Hollande himself to take a different course. I'm very concerned. Look,
but you want
President
to win
Sarkozy,
today, right?
I do, but
so what bits do you disagree and agree with of his policy?
Well, I agree with him, and I've had direct conversations with him, with Ed Miliband, that we need to change the direction of policy in the Eurozone. Without that, it's very hard for France alone to make a difference. That's the difficulty. I don't think it's actually in his gift. And to be fair, President Sarkozy a year ago was saying to Germany, you've got to change course on austerity. You've got to get the ECB working. It's not happening.
Well, Mr. Hollande would add an extra 20 billion euros to government spending over 5 years. Is that a good idea?
Well, I think if it gets the deficit down, if it gets jobs and growth moving...
Down if you're adding 20 billion to spending.
We've had this conversation before, Andrew, so many times. George Osborne's plan means £150 billion more borrowing because unemployment's up, growth is down, and if you choke off the recovery, if you're back in recession, if people aren't paying taxes anymore, you make your borrowing worse. And that's the economics of this. I know you don't like this, but it's true.
But if Mr. Hollande gets in and he does a Gallic version of the Ed Ball stimulus plan, and if he then falls on his face, your position becomes intellectually bankrupt.
But as I said to you, the problem for France is it doesn't have its destiny in its own hands because of the single currency. In Britain, we don't have to have French, Spanish, Italian problems because we're outside the euro. We actually could have a devaluation of sterling. George Osborne's imposed upon Britain the policies of the Eurozone. That is his big mistake. The problem for Hollande is he can't actually do this unless he persuades Germany in particular and the ECB to change course. If that doesn't happen, I'm fearful that we may see, even with a socialist president in France, continued stagnation in the Eurozone for a few more years.
Who do you think will mug Mr. Hollande first? Will it be Mrs. Merkel or the bond markets?
I think French leaders in the last few years have had huge problems with German politics. And I think that is at the heart of this. The Germans went into the single currency on the basis they weren't going to bail out Italy and Spain. Unless Germany stands behind Italy and Spain, this crisis is going to continue. And it's very hard for any political colour of government in France to buck that trend. We're sort of in a similar position. George Osborne, Mrs. Merkel, both digging a hole, both making things worse. This austerity is self-defeating, their plan's failing. In Britain, you've got the added problem of pasties, granny taxes, top rate of taxes for millionaires.
I was wondering when you'd work there. You got it in the final 5 seconds. Hey, boss, let's come back for the hat trick.
Well, listen, I won't come back next time George Osborne's out, because that might be months and months and months. Maybe I'll have to come back more recently than that.
Ed Bowles, thank you very much. It's approaching 12:30. You're watching the Sunday Politics. Coming up in 20 minutes, I'll be looking at the week ahead with our political panel. Until then, the Sunday politics across the UK.
Hello, good afternoon. You're watching the Sunday Politics for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire coming up today. We're live in Bradford following a dramatic election, finding out why generations of families switched their allegiance to George Galloway's Respect Party. Our guests today are Alex Shelbrooke, Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell, Jerry Sutcliffe, the Labour MP for Bradford South, and Peter Davies, the Mayor of Doncaster. And I want to start off by talking about the referendum on elected mayors. Voters in 4 Yorkshire cities rejected the idea. Alex Shelbrooke, David Cameron said he wanted a Boris Johnson in every city. Not in Yorkshire. People didn't want that there, did they?
No, fair enough. And I think my opinions are well and truly on the record that I was in favour of an elected mayor. The fact is that this was a very quiet campaign, and you were asking people to go out and say yes or no to something which they didn't know about. And, you know, quite frankly, we should have learnt the lesson from last year with the AV referendum. If the public don't understand what they're being asked to vote for, they'll stick with the status quo. But I still am in favour of mayors, and we only have to look at the situation going on in Bradford this week, where the councillors are electing a new leader of the council because the existing leader of the council lost his seat. I don't think that's straightforward accountability to the public, and I think that in the long run we'll be able to win this argument.
Well, we'll hear more from Bradford in a moment, but let's look at the moment the result was declared of the referendum in Bradford. Here we are. The world's media was gathered. Tension was no. Bit of a tumbleweed moment there. I think most people had gone home for the breakfast at that point. But I mean, Jerry Sutcliffe, I think people in Bradford, we can see you somewhere. Where's Wally? Where's Jerry?
I was there.
He was there. You were there. Jerry Sutcliffe, I think Bradford had one of the slimmest majorities against mayors, 55-45. Were you surprised by that?
Not really. I think, as Alex said, it wasn't explained properly. I'm in favour of the principle of electing mayor, but I think you've got to do it at the right time. You've got to explain it to people. That didn't happen, and people rejected it, and that's why 9 out of 10 councils across the country rejected it.
Peter Davies, you are now the Lone Ranger because people in Doncaster voted to retain their elected mayor. You're still in a job.
Well, I was anyway.
You was anyway, of course. But, I mean, are you disappointed that many of your neighbouring cities in Yorkshire rejected the idea of an election?
Well, I think they've not been very sensible. I mean, Doncaster's getting quite used to front-running at the moment, and it appears we're doing it again. Doncaster people like the idea of an elected mayor, and they voted in considerable numbers to keep the system. They also, of course, remember 30 years of Labour Party infighting, corruption and problems that they didn't like very much.
Well, stay with us because we'll talk more a bit later. But as many predicted, the local elections in Bradford came down to a nail-biting finish. George Galloway's Respect Party won 5 seats, which prevented Labour winning an outright majority. So let's cross to Len Tingle, who's live in the council chamber in City Hall for us. Len, the big question many people are asking today is who exactly is running Bradford?
That's certainly a question I'll be asking of 3 new councillors later on. But here we are, 90 seats here, 45 of them will be Labour after the election. It should have been far more. Why did it not happen in that way? Simply because of the Galloway effect. What happened was that George Galloway won that historic by-election victory, and off the back of that, his Respect Party decided to bring in 12 candidates. They won 5 seats, including, as you said, toppling the leader of the council. Now, what does that mean for who runs Bradford later on? We'll be exploring that in a moment. But first, where have these new councillors and their support come from? That's something I'll be looking at this week.
5:30 a.m. on Friday, and a spontaneous burst of sheer joy from Respect as it celebrates its 5 new councillors in Bradford. One of them, Rakaya Collector. Born in the city, she'd only ever stood in student politics before.
After George's victory, the momentum was there. There was lots of hope in the air. People wanted change, and that was the reaction I was getting from the door knocking, and I was hopeful about this victory.
So who are these brand new politicians? What made them put themselves forward, and how confident were they of success?
I think I stood because there was a real momentum for change. I was involved in George's campaign myself, and his victory brought a lot of hope to people that, look, you know, Bradford's in the dumps.
People are actually looking at Bradford.
a family house in Bradford, and a clue to where a big burst of support is coming from. Not exclusively from Bradford's British Asian voters, but Respect does appear to have created a platform here by encouraging choices to be made in ways which breaks generations of tradition.
It was something that was a collective decision that came from the family, and it was like, well, you know, Dad, who are we voting for this year?
If my husband said, give it to vote to the Labour, so we go together, we give vote to Labour. Mostly it was the Labour, sometimes maybe Conservative.
In the past, it has been the other way around, where the parents have asked their kids who they would like them to vote. And I think this time round it was different. It was the younger people telling their parents why they should vote for Respect, and they should change their views. And I think that has changed.
Or George came, I thought, we have a choice now. And he's not double standard. He's talking to them clearly, this is okay. Why not I join and put my votes, my family votes there?
We have been involved in actually canvassing and getting people to come on board, and my mother's been fully involved in that and has been speaking to her friends and people she knows and her social circle in order to try and bring together that. Now that's a first. We've never ever felt enabled or empowered enough to do that.
2,191. Despite its success, Respect didn't achieve its ambition of holding the balance of power in Bradford. But it did cause probably Labour's biggest casualty anywhere, beating Ian Greenwood, the party's veteran council leader.
Well, back live in Bradford now, I'm joined by three brand new councillors, first-timers. You each won seats from other parties, from sitting parties. Let me start with Michelle Swallow. You won your seat in Clayton, and you took that from the Tories. That was expected as far as Bradford was concerned, that you were going to make inroads into Liberal Democrats and Tories, but you didn't get that majority. Who's going to be running Bradford?
Well, obviously we still have 45 Labour councillors, which is half of the council chamber. So Labour are definitely going to be the major party in control. Admittedly, there are going to have to be some deals that are done, but, you know, Labour voters, Labour people are going to be doing their best for the people of Bradford.
Lost a little bit of credibility, though, given that Respect came from nowhere?
I don't think we lost credibility. I think we showed that we still have work to do. And our goal is to listen to the people of Bradford and deliver on the promises that we made during the election. Let's
move on to Faisal Khan here. You took your seat from the Liberal Democrats. 5 Respect candidates. Congratulations, from nowhere, but at the same time, you should have had more if the predictions of George Galloway were right, enough to hold the balance of power in Bradford. You haven't. Where does that leave you?
Well, I think in terms of what we've achieved, I think it's been fantastic. There's been a shift in the political landscape in terms of how people vote and in terms of their expectations. And I think what people want is really accountability. And I think we've shown that we're actually a viable alternative to the other parties.
But how can you be an alternative? Just 5 seats in a 90-seat chamber. You can shout, you can make your point here on the council chamber, but you can't actually control anything.
I think we can actually be a strong voice, and that's the thing. It's not just the 5 councillors; it's the people out there. I think that we've woken up the community, and they will be a strong voice with us to hold the council to account. They are beginning to do that now. They are talking to their existing councillors saying, hold on, you live in this area, what have you done with regards to Manningham Baths or the Odeon or the hole in the ground? So this is the thing.
Let's move along the line. Alias Kamani, you're the man of the moment. You beat the leader. But what do you do now that you've had this position put to you?
Well, obviously, I think we want to represent our constituents, so we're going to continue with the dialogue with them. And I think we've started talking to people who have never been engaged in the political process at all. It's, you know, and they have, we've really energised that particular group of people. So I think it's important to continue to connect with them and be a strong voice. I think.
Now, the outgoing leader of the council, yes, he said, you've made lots of promises. It'll be interesting to see how you can keep them. With 5 councillors, how can you keep them?
Well, look, I don't think we've made enormous promises. The main promise that we've made is that we will be a strong voice voice holding people to account and being transparent in terms of how we operate. But it's also important, as Faisal's mentioned, that what we've done is energise people across Bradford who are now asking really big questions about how the city is run, and especially on the big issues. So we've already started to shift, I think, the political landscape here and put life to the political process.
But is there any doubt that Labour will be running this city?
Well, yes, of course they're going to be running the city, but I think we're still going to have a significant say, and I think we're still going to be holding them to account on delivery. We've already influenced, I think, policy here. Before the election, we started talking about Odeon, and I think now we've got people talking about, being much more proactive.
Let's return back to Michelle Swallow. There should have been two Labour representatives today, but one unfortunately couldn't get here at the last minute. Michelle Swallow, you've just been hearing they've radically changed Bradford.
Yeah, I think they believe that they're a little bit bigger and better than they actually are. They're saying that they've already changed the political landscape. They really haven't changed it as much as they think they have. Labour have already been committed to this city. We were under minority control for the last 2 years, and we've made massive inroads, improvements in education in the area. We've managed to protect Sure Start centres, which were coming under threat from the Tory-led administration down in Westminster.
The thing is, though, Councillor Swallow, that in those wards where Respect won, they clearly weren't listening to that message, whether the voters weren't listening to that message. You didn't get it across.
Well, let's look at some of the majorities. There are a lot of people there who were getting that message. Some of those majorities were very, very slim. My own majority was against a Conservative councillor. People are showing that they don't believe in the Conservative-led Tory administration.
We're running out of time now. Let's get the last word to Faisal Khan. There will have to be deals done for Labour to get that one vote that they need. Will they be doing deals with you?
Well, we'll have to see. I'll leave it at that.
I don't think you can say fairer than that. We'll have to see. Certainly, the Labour leader before the election said, "No way we will do any deals with Respect." Could that change now that the?
In terms of where we are, we'll hold, like I said, people to account, and we'll vote on an issue-by-issue basis.
Councillors, all three councillors, well done. Thank you very much for that. And with that, it's back to you, Tim, in the studio.
Len, thank you. Well, of course, Jerry Sutcliffe, Ed Miliband, wants to talk about the Labour comeback this weekend, but in Bradford, he's got a big George Galloway-shaped fly in the ointment, hasn't he?
We went from 43 seats to 45 seats. True, we lost our leader, which was very sad, 15 years experience. But Respect, I've got 5 councillors, and they did that on the back of the bandwagon of the Bradford West election. They expected to do more. We will be in control, we will deal with our partners, the Greens, and we will carry on moving Bradford forward in the way that people want to see. And it'll be interesting now to see that Respect, once they get over the rhetoric, will they actually deliver anything on what they've said?
Alex Shelbrooke, if you look at the concerns many voters have in Bradford, they could apply anywhere. Do you fear the Respect effect could spread?
I think that this set of local election results has given the government a good kicking, and it has said to the government, you're not making progress quick enough on growth. I think it's interesting that actually we didn't lose any votes to the Labour Party, so I think that the Labour Party is still very much held responsible for the position they're in. But what they're also saying is, we know they messed it up, but we're wanting you to sort this out. And I think the government have to listen and learn that actually we have to make some changes along the way. We've got to try and increase our growth rates. There are new things coming on when moving forward. We got the Queen's speech this week, but there are lessons to be learnt from all the main parties. If we heed those lessons, and if we move forward, then I think the public will accept the fact that we're giving you the kicking, now we're listening to you, and we've heard that you're listening to us.
But Jerry Sutcliffe, Ed Miliband, after the Bradford West by-election, said he would learn lessons from that defeat. Has the party learnt lessons?
Yes, I think it showed in the results that Respect expected to get 12 councillors, they've got 5. We've still got a lot more work to do in Bradford, and we will do that. But across the country, nationally, 800 new councillors. Control in not only the north of England, but the Midlands, the south. We really have made strides forward. There's more still to be done, but we have 38% share of the vote now, and we have time to build on that before the next general election.
So did William Hague.
Well, but I think that what is happening now is that the split in the coalition is coming forward. We see the Queen's speech next week, but we're already seeing divisions within the Conservative Party, but also between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrat colleagues.
Peter Davis, I know you're poles apart politically, but is there a part of you that actually secretly admires George Galloway?
Yeah, and what's happened in Bradford, the people of Bradford have shot themselves completely in the foot. They've turned down the elected mayor, ended up with a hung council. They don't know who the leader of the council is. That's going to be chosen by councillors, not by the people, and they're going to be scrabbling around with the Greens in some back room of a pub to decide what the policies are. How ludicrous is that? Far better to have an elected mayor who gets on with making decisions and improving the town or city he represents.
Well, the local elections saw Labour increase their grip on power in their northern strongholds, including Sheffield and Leeds. With the rest of the election news, Sean Stowell has our roundup in 60 seconds.
Labour were the big winners in the east of our region, taking control of North East Lincolnshire and strengthening their grip on Hull and Lincoln, taking seats at the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives' expense.
I think the residents in North East Lincolnshire have sent the coalition a bit of a message that they're fed up with being told something that is untrue.
The UK Independence Party celebrated winning its first seat in this region. UKIP's Ron Shepherd took the Scartho ward from the Tories.
It's a phenomenal breakthrough for the United Kingdom Independence Party in North East Lincolnshire. It's the first day of school. We've made a massive breakthrough and we're going to build on it.
But turnout was low in most places. In some wards, fewer than 1 in 5 people bothered to vote.
Alex Shelbrooke, most Conservatives I've spoken to since the local election on Thursday say the trouble with the government at the moment is they aren't pursuing traditional Conservative policies. You know, you need tougher policies on things like immigration and law and order. Do you agree with that?
No, I absolutely agree with that. Fact is, we didn't get an outright majority at the last election with the Liberal Democrats. I think if the Liberal Democrats are honest moving forward, they should be putting out election leaflets to say, if you don't want to see a British Bill of Human Rights, if you don't want us to renegotiate our European powers, then vote Liberal Democrat. The fact is that we saw the Labour Party bring these things in. We saw the Labour Party pass powers to Europe. The Conservative Party have a clear message they want to do this, but with 307 MPs, they can't achieve it. For me, the answer to this is simple. We need a Conservative majority at the next general election, and then these traditional Conservative things which many people are talking about, including controlling immigration and sorting out the European Union and a British Bill of Human Rights, can be delivered.
Split's already started, but what's happening is that 2 years in, they're now being held responsible for what they've done. £100 million spent on a wasted AV vote, £100 million on elected police commissioners, £10 million going towards the the International Monetary Fund. These are decisions that they've taken at a time when we're supposed to be in austerity, at a time when we're supposed to be trying to pull the country together and get into growth. Double-dip recession, and it's now that the chickens are coming home to roost.
But the turnout in these elections was low. It was less than 1 in 5 people voted in some areas. That's hardly a ringing endorsement of Labour's policies.
I accept that, Tim, and I think that's something that we've all got to look at. Why only a third of the country are prepared to vote. I think that's because the three main parties have got to start getting the message out into the wider communities and be relevant to people's problems. People are seeing the petrol prices go. They're seeing their wages being cut. They're seeing their jobs being lost, and we have to be relevant to that, and that's what we've got to do in the Labour Party to learn those lessons.
Peter Davies, we saw the first UKIP councillor in our region elected in Grimsby. As someone who represents one of the other smaller parties, the English Democrats, why is it that the parties, the minority parties as some would say, just can't crack the kind of stranglehold on the main three? Most seats are still being won by Tories, Labour and Liberal Democrats, aren't they?
We've started, as I proved 3 years ago, as George has proved this week in Bradford. And in fact, they want to watch out because we've got three parties who are largely the same. You can't tell the difference between them most of the time. They're completely out of touch with public opinion. We've heard about law and order, immigration, Europe. The public have very strong views on that across the piece, and there isn't one politician in Parliament saying anything about any of those items. It's time they stop treating people with contempt. The fact is that people like George Galloway and the English Democrats and UKIP are listening to what people are saying and reacting to it. And in Doncaster, I listen very carefully to what the people want and try to put many of their policies into practice.
Alex Shelbrooke, if you look at the figures, UKIP are giving the Tories a good run for their money in a lot of places now, aren't they?
I think we saw roughly a 10% swing from Conservative to UKIP in the constituency, and I think that what that says to me is that we're not switching back to Labour because we know the situation we're in, but we want you to do more, and therefore we're going to give you a bit of a kicking and we want you to do more. It's up to us to take on board what the electorate said and move forward with that. But I think we've got to be very careful about the minority parties when we're moving. And, for example, there's not a BNP councillor left in this country, which I think is great news. But what I am disturbed about is how many former BNP councillors stood as English Democrats.
Very briefly, Peter Davies, are you going to stand again as Mayor of Doncaster?
Of course I'm going to stand again.
What odds do you give yourself? Betting man.
Well, it looks to me like a two-horse race between me and the Labour Party, and well, let's call it evens at the moment.
We have to go back to Andrew Neil in London.
Tomorrow is the May Day bank holiday, but there will be no rest for the coalition. Dave and Nick are expected to renew their vows on Tuesday. The Queen's speech is on Wednesday, and the Levison Circus continues with high-profile appearances on Thursday and Friday from the Prime Minister's former spin doctor, Andy Coulson, and his former riding partner and News International texting mate, Rebecca Brooks. That should put a dampener on any attempted comeback and give our panel so much to talk about in the week ahead. So, Isabel, they're not, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, they're not going to risk another Rose Garden moment. That would just be too much for the country to take. But I think they're going to a factory and they're going to kind of renew their vows.
Something like that. I mean,
how's that going to work?
I don't think that they're actually close to splitting up, so hopefully it should be a bit less painful than a kind of Charles and Diana moment. Having said that, I think it still is quite a high-risk stunt because everybody will be wheeling out the body language experts, and it will be, every sort of movement will be very over-analysed. So I hope they're putting in a rehearsal like every good people who are about to get married.
I mean, when they appeared in the Rose Garden, they looked like two individuals that would not have got into a Chris Grayling bed and breakfast.
No,
that won't happen this time.
The civil partnership analogy was used back then. we are about to see what I've decided to call the re-coalitionising of the government, and that would mean
there's got to be a better word. There's got to. Only the Economist could come up with re-coalitionising.
You can have that one for free. And
I sell it on.
And that will mean more Cameron Clegg appearances, more areas of commonality emphasised. But the problem is that they're going to face resistance from the Lib Dem left, which argues for more differentiation between the two parties, and the Tory right, who think that too many concessions are being made to Clegg anyway. Now, in my view, both those flanks are wrong. I think that the Tory is a predominantly Conservative government in policy, and the Lib Dems haven't benefited at all from differentiation. But it is a political reality that Cameron and Clegg will have to wrestle with.
But if Mr Cameron listens to anybody in the current climate, he's going to have to listen to the Tory right, isn't he?
Absolutely, and I think there's going to be a lot of really angry guests in the back of this wedding ceremony that we see again. And like Isabel said, we're really going to have to watch the body language on that.
Who will be the embarrassing uncle?
Well, who won't be the embarrassing uncle, I think, is the better question to ask.
Or the embarrassing aunt. Oh, that would be Nadine Dorries.
Absolutely. But, I mean, I think what Janan was saying was right here. I mean, you know, the Tories have just lost 400 or so council seats, and we just had 3 Conservative MPs at the top of the programme saying that the reason that they feel that the Conservatives lost so badly was they're not being true to their party roots. And to come out now and have a public declaration of, you know, joint support, I think is going to get a lot of people's backs up. And also, not just within the party system, but also everyone at home who's watching in the public who feels that, you know, they're hurting, that they have not enough is being done on the economy, and also that there's quite a lot of incompetence around. And so that kind of self-celebrational party, I think, is really quite dangerous for them.
But the party line we're getting from the coalition now with the Queen's speech on Wednesday is that, yeah, what really matters is jobs and growth. And that we want to do Lord's reform, but it's not a huge priority. It's not the most important thing. That's fine. They've read the polls and they know the focus groups. But other than Lord's reform, what is really going to be in this Queen's speech that will matter a lot, and what will be in it that will do anything for jobs and growth?
I think it'll be quite a thin Queen's speech, especially compared to the last 2. There'll be a bit of action on crime and some stuff to do with families to shore up the Tory right, basically. But you have to remember that this government has been astonishingly busy in its first 2 years. Schools reform, police, NHS, welfare, and the cuts. And so if this is a quieter Queen's speech, that's not saying much, because they embarked on so much to begin with in 2010. The political danger is that if a government begins to lose its sense of mission and action, it can be buffeted around by trivial and frivolous events, which is what has been happening over the past couple of months.
I mean, there are some Tory MPs who would argue that actually it's better to do less and do it better.
Totally.
And, you know, having a sort of long list of bills that nobody really cares about is no particular advantage. I mean, I have read a list of what's on the Queen's speech, and, you know, frankly, it isn't very exciting, but really all that matters is the economy.
And what does it do for jobs? I mean, they're by their own test now. What does it do for jobs and growth? And I'm not sure there'll be anything in the Queen's
There's something
speech.
on banking reform, I believe.
But banking reform's already and frankly, banking reform is something that may do something for growth in the years to come, but not now.
But also the kind of political reality, I think, makes it really difficult for the Conservatives to know what to do. Their backbenchers want them to move more to the right, but the election that we've just seen shows that the country is slightly more towards the left. And actually coming up with a strategy for the Conservatives that works both for your Conservative right backbenchers and the north of the country is a really, really difficult act to walk. And I think that's why we're going to have to see that everything is toned down in the Queen's speech.
I agree. I personally think Cameron's first response to the election results should be an act of omission, not commission. He has to not do what the Tory right want him to do.
Are we moving to a referendum on House of Lords reform?
I think that David Cameron, who has actually been on record saying he's not in favour of that, is becoming more receptive to the idea. Why? Because it's quite a useful delaying tactic. I mean, it could possibly be as late as 2015 that they do the referendum at the same time as a general election. There would be arguments in favour of that from the point of view of saving money, and it would allow David Cameron just to kick it off for, you know, for a few years.
His own people would say, yeah, and can we have a referendum on Europe in the manifesto, though? Because they're going to say, if you're going to have one on the laws that nobody cares about, can we have one that we all care about?
So I wouldn't be surprised if one and possibly all three parties go into the next election with a commitment to holding a referendum on the EU in the next Parliament.
Absolutely.
For the Tories...
So that means we won't get one.
Yeah, well...
Now, Leveson, the gift that keeps on giving, Isabel. And we've got the PM's former spin doctor on Thursday, and we've got his texting mate, Mrs. Brooks, on Friday. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, I think this will completely overshadow the Queen's speech anyway. I mean...
and the revamp of the government.
Because David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks were close personal friends. They may still be, who knows. And I think the possibility of text messages being revealed is very, very worrying for both of them.
Yeah, but they have now been granted special participant status, which grants them, I believe, the right to redact certain pieces of evidence that they're allowed to have.
I thought it just gave them the right to see things in advance.
No, they can ask the inquiry to ask specific questions of the witnesses, and they can also request redactions.
Can you redact the kisses? I don't think so.
No, not in spirit.
I don't think that's going to... I mean, there's nothing good can come out of this for the Prime Minister.
No.
It may not be a car crash, but nothing good can come out of it.
I agree, and I think one of the questions that might come up is exactly what questions did the Prime Minister ask of Coulson when he hired him a number of years ago. And even if that goes well, there's the political problem, which is that it just makes it harder to relaunch a government when this is still a dominant news story.
What I would do, I mean, if you look at what's happening in Australia at the moment, they're reviewing media ownership laws. And I think if Cameron actually wanted to make some capital out of this, he'd say, we really need to look at the concentration of media ownership in this country. We think that we shouldn't be allowed to own, 40%. Perhaps we should look at shortening it.
Well,
we want to tackle this head on and own this issue rather than just suffering from it.
Does that mean no BBC?
Well, what it means is Mr. Murdoch may not get 70% of the papers he has in Australia. He has 70%
that will get changed.
Versus 35 here. Mr. Osborne didn't look very comfortable when asked about Mr. Coulson this morning on Andrew Marr show.
I didn't actually see that, but again,
Take my word for it.
Mr. Osborne was the one that I think was responsible for bringing him in, so this is not comfortable for him at all.
No. Well, plenty to keep us busy. It's only a bank holiday for some. I have to go home and write my submission to the Leveson report. It has to be done on time under pain of jail, which is a little different from the old politics essays I used to write. Thank you very much. That's it from the Sunday Politics for this week, but I'll be back with the Daily Politics on BBC Two on Tuesday with Joe Coburn at midday with the Cameron Clegg reunion and a preview of the Queen's speech. And I'm back here on BBC One at the earlier time of 11 o'clock next week. Remember, if it's Sunday, it's the Sunday Politics.